Think your Chevrolet can only last 200,000 miles? You're wrong. I've seen Chevys pass 300,000 miles and keep going, while others fall apart early. It isn't luck, it comes down to habits. When I talk to Chevy owners about making their truck last past 300,000 miles, the very first thing I bring up is engine oil changes. A lot of owners assume newer Chevys like the Silverado 1500 with the 5.3-liter V8 or a Cruze with a 1.5-liter Eurotech can just go forever without fresh oil. But that's just not true. Even if most modern Chevrolets come with an oil life monitoring system that tells you when it's time, this calculates oil life based on your driving conditions. If you let it run to zero every time, it can eventually stress the lifters and bearings over the long haul. For the absolute best longevity, a more conservative approach is better than always relying on the system's maximum interval. Chevy engines that get regular oil and filter changes cruise past 250,000 miles with no drama, while those whose neglected oil turned into sludge by 80,000 miles face costly repairs like camshaft or timing chain issues. Most newer Chevys that use full synthetic oil will do fine for around 7,500 to 10,000 miles between changes, but if you do a lot of towing, short trips, or city driving, I recommend pulling that interval down to 5,000 to 7,500 miles, and each time you change the oil, you should change the filter too. Changing oil on your Chevy regularly is a small cost compared to future repairs. It's often $50 DIY for quality synthetic and a good filter, or about $150 at the shop, but the payoff in engine life is huge. But making your Chevy last over 300,000 miles without major repairs doesn't only depend on engine oil, but also on the other fluids in your car. When you're chasing 300,000 miles on your Chevy, checking all the fluid levels is one of the biggest things that will keep small issues from turning into big expensive repairs. A lot of Chevy drivers think that checking oil is enough, but most vehicles like Silverado, Tahoe, or Equinox have brake fluid, transmission fluid, differential fluid, and in vehicles with hydraulic systems, power steering fluid, all doing critical jobs. If any of these fluids get low, dirty, or contaminated, parts start wearing out fast and repairs get pricier. Brake fluid on most Chevys should be looked at whenever you check your brakes and replaced about every 2 years or so because it absorbs moisture that can make your brakes feel spongy or corrode parts. Transmission fluid is another one that's easy to ignore, but I recommend a fluid change every 30,000 miles on older Chevys and up to 60,000 miles on newer models. Aside from this, you should check it monthly to catch any leaks or dark, burnt-smelling fluids before the transmission shifts rough or overheats. Power steering fluid in older models and differential fluid don't need attention as often, maybe every 30,000 miles, but if you let them drop too low, they can make the steering whine or wear out the gears prematurely. Here's a piece of advice. A quick glance under the hood once a month with a clean rag can save you hundreds to thousands of dollars in repairs. But this isn't the only tip to keep in mind when prolonging the life of your Chevy. Hey there, it's Jerry. I've been wrenching on Chevys for over 30 years, from small sedans like the Cruze to full-size trucks like the Silverado. I've seen engines last because the owner did the basics right. I've also seen solid trucks ruined by small, avoidable mistakes. Today, I'll break down clear steps that protect your engine, extend miles, and help you avoid major repairs. This is how a Chevy earns $300K. If you want your Chevy to keep running strong instead of costing you expensive parts, you need to use the right fluids and fuels. A lot of owners think all motor oil, coolant, or gas is pretty much the same, but that's not true, especially in Chevys. For starters, always use GM-approved fluids. Chevy's automatic transmissions, like the 8L90 or 6L80, were designed for Dexron VI ATF, not just any red fluid off the shelf. Using the wrong type can change clutch friction and wear parts prematurely. Likewise, the coolant in a Tahoe or Suburban needs to be the right ethylene glycol mix that meets GM specs to keep your engine from overheating and avoid warped heads or blown head gaskets. But don't overlook this. I recommend using top-tier detergent gasoline for Chevy engines because cheaper fuels tend to leave more deposits in the fuel system and on injectors. Chevy owners of 5.3-liter V8s have dealt with repeated misfires and carbon buildup that cleaner, better gas helped reduce. Buying the right fluid at the pump or parts store costs pennies compared to repairing fuel injectors or an overheated engine. But there's one thing Chevy owners forget, and that's using additives and synthetic oil correctly. Do you use additives in your Chevrolet? A lot of owners hear about some magic additive that's going to make their engine live forever, but here's the key part. Most modern Chevy engines already come with engine oil and fuel with built-in chemistry designed by the factory. That means pouring random additives into your oil often does more harm than good. And I always warn against using the wrong oil additives, especially those that contain Teflon, chlorine, metal, molybdenum, and graphite, or any aftermarket additives that conflict with the oil's certified formulation. These can upset the oil's balance and even clog passages in modern engines. That doesn't mean all additives are bad. You can use the right periodic fuel injector cleaners to maintain your fuel system. This is especially useful for high soot engines, such as the 5.3-liter V8, to keep injectors and intake valves cleaner and smoother. When it comes to synthetic oil, one of the best places to use it is in the differentials. You can improve longevity by using quality synthetic gear oil, like a 75W90 full synthetic that meets GM's GL5 requirements. Many modern Chevys come with synthetic from the factory, but it's the right choice for a refill. Many Chevy truck owners have realized that synthetic differential oil looks cleaner and lasts longer than conventional oil after tens of thousands of miles. But don't miss this. If your Chevy has a limited slip differential, the factory gear oil already has the right friction modifiers, so you don't need extra additives until you notice noise or chatter. Choosing the right additives and oil is very important, but the next step is one that matters more than most Chevy owners ever realize. When I help Chevy owners extend their engine life past 300,000 miles, one upgrade I recommend is adding an oil cooler, especially if you're hauling trailers or towing heavy loads. Many newer Chevys, like a Silverado 5.3 or Tahoe 5.3-liter equipped with a tow package, actually come from the factory with an oil-to-coolant heat exchanger that helps keep the oil temperature in check. After all, oil that gets too hot breaks down faster and wears internal parts more quickly. That system runs oil through a cooler inside the radiator assembly and then back to the engine. And it's there for a reason. Here's the thing. Chevy owners should consider aftermarket oil coolers when they do a lot of highway towing or drive in hot climates, because reducing oil temps by even 20 to 30 degrees under load can help your bearings and camshafts endure less stress over time. One Silverado owner had oil temperature spike to above 240 degrees Fahrenheit when towing and added an external cooler with a sandwich adapter. With this upgrade, his oil temperature returned closer to normal, and that protected the engine on long hauls. If your Chevy sees frequent towing, dusty roads, or long highway days, installing a quality cooler can be a good investment compared to a major rebuild later. Kits for Silverado trucks usually run around $350. For DIYers, many kits bolt on with basic hand tools in a couple of hours. Just make sure you don't introduce extra leak points, and always bleed and check for leaks after installation. Adding an oil cooler to your Chevy truck can go a long way in extending its life without major repairs, but you also shouldn't brush off the timing components. Did you know that most modern Chevrolets, especially trucks like the Silverado 1500 V8s and cars like the Cruiser Malibu, use timing chains instead of belts? Well, that doesn't mean they're maintenance-free. Timing chains are designed to last a very long time, often well past 200,000 miles, but the guides and tensioners that keep them tight are another story. If those parts wear out or the chain stretches, the whole engine's timing can go out of whack. A lot of Chevy owners of certain engine generations, like some earlier Ecotec engines and some V8s, notice timing chain or related component faults around 100,000 to 150,000 miles, like a faint rattling noise at startup or a check engine code related to cam timing. One Equinox owner had to replace the chain and guides around 230,000 miles because they neglected the oil changes, leading to a hefty repair bill. So don't wait for loud noise or a failure. Chevy manuals don't say much about chain replacement, but I recommend inspection whenever there are warning signs like startup rattles or codes. And by maintaining perfect oil health, there's one part you should never neglect on your Chevrolet, and that's the battery. The battery on your Chevrolet is more important than you might realize. especially if you want to keep it running past 300,000 miles. A lot of owners think once their truck or SUV starts fine, the battery is good forever. But most Chevrolet batteries only last about 3 years in hot climates or 5 to 7 years in moderate climates, or they start fading out and leaving you stuck on the side of the road. Regular checks and simple cleaning can save you from unexpected breakdowns with Chevy trucks and SUVs. I recommend inspecting your battery visually at least once a month for corrosion, cracks, or leaks, and keeping the terminals clean ensures the electrical system is healthy. If the terminals are corroded, you might notice snow white or a bluish buildup. This kills the connection and makes it harder to start a car. Once, a 2010 Equinox owner kept getting the battery saver active message until cleaning the terminals and putting on a bit of dielectric grease improved the connection and cut down weird warnings. On another Silverado, a new battery couldn't start the truck because the ground cable was corroded. Fixing that connection made a night and day difference. You can solve this problem with a battery test at home using a multimeter or by a visit to your mechanic. As for cleaning your terminals, it just takes a few minutes with a wire brush and some baking soda. Another thing you should pay attention to when maintaining your Chevrolet for a long life is the serpentine belt. This is one of the easiest preventive moves for long-term reliability. But do you know what this belt actually does? If the answer is no, you're not the only one. In trucks like the Silverado and SUVs like the Tahoe and Equinox, the serpentine belt drives your alternator, water pump, power steering pump, and AC compressor. If it fails, all these systems will stop working at once. That would be a mess. That's why cracked, frayed, or shiny glazed belts should be swapped out before they rip and leave you stranded. Most Chevy serpentine belts last 100,000 to 150,000 miles, but how you drive and where you live can change that window. A 2022 owner noticed his vehicle started squeaking and shredding belts under 40,000 miles, but didn't realize this was because a pulley was misaligned. So the belt isn't the only important thing, the pulley is too. This is the main point. A worn serpentine belt can slip and rob your alternator of charge or even stop your water pump cold. This might be the unlikely cause of your Chevy always overheating. If you ignore this, your costs will be much higher than a $60 belt. So I recommend checking the belt every few oil changes, and if there are any cracks, grooves, or squeals on startup, replace it with an OEM quality belt. Aside from paying attention to the serpentine belts, the next tip is one that many Chevy owners might have never heard about. When aiming to keep your Chevy past 300,000 miles, one thing most people overlook is the condition of rubber hoses under the hood. On vehicles like a Silverado, Tahoe, or even a supercharged Sonic or Equinox, the hoses carry coolant, vacuum, and other vital fluids. Over time, the factory rubber hoses get hard, crack, or swell. That can increase the chances of leaks or cause your Chevy to overheat. That's why I often recommend considering silicone hoses as an upgrade, which resist heat and chemical breakdown much better than rubber. If you swap in quality silicone, you can get more years of service life before you ever have to think about replacements. Silicone stays flexible under heat and doesn't dry out like rubber does, especially in hot climates or heavy use like towing. This is not just a hypothetical. It's a major problem for Chevrolet owners. One Chevy Sonic owner had a hose pop off near the coolant reservoir on the way home and spilled his coolant. If he didn't have a temporary fix and DIY tools in his car, it could have further damaged other parts. Some folks prefer to use OEM rubber because it's cheaper and often lasts fine for a decade or more, but if you're running an older V6, a performance-tuned Corvette, or simply want a longer-lasting solution, the longer lifespan and heat resistance of silicone hoses can protect your cooling system much better in the long run. If you've already learned tips that can prolong the life of your Chevrolet, the next few points are ones most Chevy owners might not have guessed or often overlook. One of the simplest things that makes a big difference in your Chevy is changing the air and cabin filters on time. On most Chevrolet models, the engine air filter helps keep dirt, dust, and road grime out of the intake so your engine breathes clean air and doesn't work harder than it has to. I suggest checking or replacing that filter around every 15,000 miles, especially if your driving environment is dusty. Furthermore, the cabin air filters clean the air coming into the HVAC system, and you should also replace it around the same time. A lot of owners don't realize that a clogged engine air filter can make the engine feel sluggish or reduce fuel efficiency because the computer is trying to make up for restricted airflow. If you pull out the filter at 25,000 miles, you might find it packed with grit and realize it has been blocking your airflow. At the same time, Chevy owners that ignore the cabin filter end up with weak airflow, musty odors, and dust settling on the dash. Swapping it out brings everything back to normal. Both filters are cheap, about $50 each, and you can change them yourself in about 15 minutes with nothing more than a screwdriver. Aside from these filters, you should also take care of the cooling system regularly. When you're trying to push a Chevy past 300,000 miles without a major engine repair, flushing the coolant system regularly is one thing you don't want to skip. The coolant does far more than just keep things from freezing in winter. It carries heat away from the engine year-round and keeps corrosion from eating away at metal inside the radiator, water pump, and cylinders. Over time, old coolant gets contaminated with rust, scale, and dirt, which means it's unable to transfer heat efficiently. Before you know it, corrosion builds up inside the passages that you can't see. Fresh coolant keeps temperature regulation working properly and protects the engine from overheating or from corrosion that can warp heads or damage components. I recommend a coolant flush about every 50,000 miles as a conservative, longevity-focused practice, or sooner if you do a lot of towing, city driving, or run in hot weather. Manufacturer intervals are often longer, like 5 years, 150,000 miles, but the proactive approach always pays off. When Chevy drivers flush their coolant systems, especially on older Silverados, the temperature gauge settles into a steadier range on highway drives. So, you should never let coolant get old and cause rust and blockages. This costs more to fix than a simple $150 flush service. If you're good with your hands and basic tools, good distilled water can get a coolant flush done in a couple of hours. There's one tip I always recommend to Chevy owners, and that's what comes next. If you want to keep your Chevy running strong past 300,000 miles, an upgrade to high-performance cooling components can make a real difference, especially if you tow heavy loads, cruise in hot weather, or put lots of miles on a Silverado, Tahoe, or diesel Duramax. Most factory cooling setups on a Chevrolet can meet the average driver's needs, but once you start hauling trailers or climbing hills with a loaded truck, the stock radiator, water pump, and fans can be pushed right up to their limits. That's when you notice that your Chevrolet is overheating too often. With oil breaking down fast and bearings and heads under stress, this can shorten engine life. But here's the key part. Beefier radiators with larger aluminum cores and high-flow water pumps help your Chevy shed heat faster and more consistently under stress. Premium radiators made for Duramax diesels and big block V8s are built to handle higher heat loads than the original plastic tank units, improving coolant circulation and keeping the engine in its comfort zone. A lot of Chevy owners have noticed that upgrading to a 4-core aluminum radiator with electric fans on older Silverados prevented overheating while towing trailers and hauling heavy loads. This was something the original cooling gear couldn't handle without pushing temperatures into dangerous territory. You can also consider adding electric fans to your Chevy engine because they pull more air through the radiator at idle or low speed than the stock mechanical fan. Upgrading to better cooling gear might cost a few $100s more up front than stock parts, but compared to a warped head gasket or overheated engine, that's money well spent. But regardless of the part you want to replace in your Chevrolet, you should always consider OEM parts. When I tell Chevy owners that using OEM parts instead of cheap aftermarket stuff often saves money in the long run, it's not just shop talk. Here's the key part. Chevrolet OEM parts are made to the exact specs your engine or suspension was built with, so they fit right and perform the way the engineers intended. That's true whether you're getting AC Delco brake pads on a Silverado 5.3-liter or a genuine GM water pump on a Malibu. OEM parts are designed and tested for your exact Chevy, which means using them promotes long-term reliability. A lot of Chevy owners buy budget aftermarket brake pads or sensors because they're cheap, and then they're back replacing the same thing a year later. One Silverado driver I know changed an aftermarket part 3 times before finally deciding to spend a bit more on AC Delco OEM parts. But here's the thing. OEM parts often cost more up front. A genuine Chevrolet brake pad kit or injector can be about double the price of a generic alternative. But the difference is the real part offers durability and peace of mind. Still, let me add this. For many wear items like brake pads, filters, and shocks, high-quality aftermarket brands from reputable manufacturers like Bosch, Wix, and Bilstein can meet or exceed OEM performance. So you can ask your mechanic for recommendations. OEM parts are backed by Chevrolet's limited parts warranty, so if something fails prematurely, you've got protection that aftermarket prices usually don't offer. Chevy drivers who want to take their truck past 300,000 miles should choose the right part the first time, as this keeps repairs from snowballing into bigger headaches. That's the best way to improve your investment and help your Chevy reach and exceed the 300,000 mile mark. And finally, if you want your Chevrolet to last for over 300,000 miles, you need to drive gently. Changing how you drive can get the most miles out of your Chevy. Many owners figure that once the engine's tuned up, their Chevy will keep chugging, but aggressive acceleration and hard braking actually add stress to the engine, transmission, brakes, and suspension. And even the drivetrain doesn't like being pushed hard all the time. Driving smoothly, like easing onto the throttle and anticipating stops instead of slamming on the brakes, keeps internal components running cooler and reduces wear. This is one more way to protect your Chevy as the miles rack up. But here's an important tip. Consider storing your Chevy in a garage or covered area when you can to dramatically cut down on rust and environmental wear, especially if you live where moisture, road salt, or humidity is common. Chevy trucks built before 2014, like some of the older Silverado 1500s, are known to develop rust in frame rails and brake lines if left outside in salty or wet conditions. And that kind of corrosion can cost you big bucks long before you hit 300,000 miles.